I never thought my life would unravel like this, sitting alone in the quiet of a house that no longer feels like mine, staring at papers that spell disaster, my hands trembling as I read every line, each one a cold reminder that my son has lost everything he was meant to inherit, all because of a decision he made that I cannot forgive: illegal construction on the property that belonged to generations before us. And now the bank, the neighbors, even distant relatives, whisper about what we should have done. I feel the weight of betrayal heavier than any mortgage, heavier than the aches in my bones. I remember the day he told me he needed extra space, that he would handle it quietly, that no one would mind, and at the time I trusted him. I never imagined that his shortcuts, his disregard for rules, would turn the life we built into something fragile and crumbling. I paced the old wooden floors, hearing the echoes of laughter that once filled this home, now replaced by anxiety and silence. I reach for the framed photograph of my husband, gone these 10 years, and wonder what he would have said if he knew our only son risked his future for convenience. I feel anger bubbling up, confusion, shame, every emotion tangled like the wires of the electricity he installed without permits. I look out the window at the half-finished wall, leaning dangerously, the neighbors staring from behind curtains, and I know the inspectors will not show mercy. I think of my son, my baby, the boy who used to bring me flowers from the garden, and I see him now, arguing with contractors over fines, pleading with lawyers over permits, every mistake magnified. I realize I cannot intervene, not completely, not without revealing my own fears and doubts, my own failures in guiding him. I sit back in the faded armchair, the fabric worn, just like my patience. And I hear the phone ringing. I hesitate before answering, my mind racing with scenarios of disaster and hope. I remember the lawyer's words from yesterday, that if this is not handled, the inheritance, the land, everything could be lost. My chest tightens. I feel years pressing down. The house seems smaller, the walls closer. I think of the next steps, the fines, the repairs, the negotiations, the apologies that will be impossible to give. I close my eyes for a second, wishing time would reverse, wishing I could make my son understand without destroying our bond. I hear the knock at the door, unexpected, deliberate, and my heart jumps, my mind screams, and I freeze, unsure if it is a friend, a creditor, or the person who will change everything. I take a deep breath, clutch my shawl, and step forward, knowing that the answer behind that door will define the next chapter of our lives. But I cannot guess which path we will take. And in that uncertainty, I feel both fear and a strange, pulsing hope, a need to see what comes next, even if it shakes the very foundation of our family. I remember the days when my home was full, when laughter bounced off the walls, and even small arguments ended with smiles. My son always the center of it, my pride and my worry. My daughter-in-law, quiet but clever, always measuring words before speaking, sometimes too cautious, sometimes too cold. I have loved her like a daughter, but there are moments I wonder if she has her own agenda. My neighbors, some kind and supportive, others sharp-tongued and eager to gossip. They know pieces of our story, enough to judge, and I feel their eyes whenever I walk past the half-finished wall. I think of my old friend Margaret, who once warned me about trusting too easily, her voice ringing in my memory. I brushed it off, too confident in my guidance. In my son, I see now that some lessons come too late. My colleagues at the small foundation where I volunteer, they admire my work, my wisdom, but they never know the nights I spend pacing, worrying about money, reputation, family. I reflect on my late husband, how he balanced ambition and care, his voice echoing in my mind as I try to counsel my son, but he does not listen. I see now that perhaps some of my mistakes in parenting paved the way for this crisis. I pushed him toward independence too early, gave him freedom without enough caution. I wanted him to learn, to thrive, but I fear I may have enabled recklessness instead. I notice the subtle frictions. My daughter-in-law siding with him, my own heart torn between protection and discipline. Neighbors whisper about permits, legality, and I feel shame creeping in. I see that some of my friends admire my resilience, others pity me, and I wonder which feeling drives my son when he makes his choices. I reflect on my siblings, one distant, one envious, their interactions always leaving me uneasy. Small slights remembered from childhood feel larger now. My heart aches thinking about who will help and who will hinder when the property is evaluated. The inheritance is in question. I sense the fragility of alliances, the weight of family expectations pressing down. I think about my late husband again, about how he managed conflicts quietly, with foresight. How different life feels without that steady hand. I feel both regret and resolve, knowing that the next decisions will define more than just money. They will shape relationships, loyalty, trust, I consider my son, his ambitions, his impulses. The way he seeks approval while resisting advice. I see how ambition can blind even the best intentions. I imagine possible futures, some with reconciliation, some with betrayal. The uncertainty gnaws at me. My mind cycles through scenarios. Who will stand by us? Who will stand by us? Who will falter? I see the complex web of people around me, each with their own motives. And I realize the real inheritance is not the land, but the balance of trust, love, and integrity that may be at stake. I sit back and breathe slowly. The quiet of the house pressing in, the shadows of old photographs seeming to judge, and I know that understanding the relationships, the past choices, and the subtle tensions is the only way to prepare for the storms ahead. But even with clarity, I feel the suspense building, waiting for the next move that will tip everything, and I am not sure who will emerge unscathed. The moment I discovered the first real problem, my heart sank like a stone dropped into dark water. I had thought the illegal construction was a minor issue, a temporary oversight, something that could be fixed with a few papers and a few calls. But the truth hit harder than I could have imagined. My son had not just built without permission, he had hidden details, documents, contractors, even conversations from me, and I felt both anger and fear collide inside. I thought I knew him, the boy who ran to me with scraped knees, the young man I taught responsibility to, but now he seemed a stranger, a reckless stranger. I questioned everything. Did he act alone? Was someone influencing him? Were there whispers behind closed doors I could not hear? I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down, more than the fines, more than the risk of losing the inheritance. I sat at the kitchen table, the papers spread before me like accusations. I imagined conversations I might have had with neighbors, lawyers, the bank, each one a possible confrontation, each one a chance for disaster. I thought about my own silence, my trust, the decisions I let slide because I believed in him, and I wondered if my leniency had fueled this recklessness. Then came the phone call, quiet, measured, from a man claiming to be a surveyor, pointing out errors, hazards, violations, hints of legal trouble I had not expected. I felt panic rise cold and sharp. I tried to reason with myself to consider solutions, but every path seemed tangled with risk. Every choice carried consequences. I realized my son might not see the stakes. He might not understand that each shortcut, each hidden action, could cost him not just money, but respect, stability, the trust of the family. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to force him to see the reality, but I felt powerless. And then I caught a glimpse of another note, a message from a neighbor, one I had not noticed before, suggesting that someone close to us had encouraged him, perhaps even manipulated him, and suddenly suspicion twisted my stomach. Was it a friend, a distant relative, someone who benefited if we fell? I felt the first seeds of doubt about everyone around me. My own judgment, my ability to protect the family. The moral dilemma gnawed at me. If I confronted my son, would I push him away? Would I break him? But if I stayed silent, would I lose everything? I paced, my mind racing through scenarios, weighing loyalty against responsibility, love against duty, each step a balance over a fragile edge. The sun fell behind the trees, shadows stretching across the half-built wall. The house seemed smaller, the walls closer, and I knew that tomorrow would demand decisions, difficult decisions, that could not be postponed. I imagined the confrontation, the arguments, the pleading, the explanations that might fail. And my heart ached. I had to act, but I did not know how. The fear of making the wrong move, of losing the son I still loved, of losing the legacy of our family. It pressed down on me, heavy, unrelenting. I felt the tension tightened like a rope around my chest. And just as I reached for the papers to make my next move, the doorbell rang. Unexpected, deliberate, a sound that made every instinct scream caution. I froze, my mind spinning with possibilities. Who had come, friend or threat, helper or betrayer? And in that moment, I realized the first turning point had arrived. The moral choice would demand everything I could give, and I did not yet know what I was capable of. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Every choice I made seemed to ripple into a storm I could not control. I tried to guide my son quietly, to steer him back from disaster, but he resisted, stubborn and defensive. Every word I spoke, met with arguments, excuses, even silence that felt sharper than anger. The neighbors, once polite, now whispered openly, their glances like knives. I felt their judgment in every step I took outside. I reached out to the bank, the lawyers, trying to understand the fines, the permits, the violations. But every answer only revealed more complications. My heart raced, my hands shook, the weight of responsibility crushing me. I realized that if I made a misstep, the inheritance, the family reputation, even our stability could collapse. I caught my son in a heated discussion with a contractor. Their words clipped, tense, full of blame and half-truths. I knew some of this tension came from my failure to intervene sooner, but I also sensed manipulation. Someone pushing him toward rash decisions. I did not know if it was greed, envy, or simple carelessness. I tried to stay calm, to mediate, but every attempt seemed to escalate the conflict. My own doubts gnawed at me. Was I wrong in trusting him? Wrong in letting him take control? Wrong in staying silent when I felt the first tremors of trouble? I reached for old advice from my husband, advice now echoing in my mind like a ghost, to act with caution, to observe before moving. Yet every hour wasted seemed to tighten the noose. I saw friends and relatives positioning themselves, some offering help, others quietly taking sides. I felt the tension rise, every relationship a potential betrayal, every offer of help a possible trap. I could not tell who genuinely cared. I could not tell if my son would recover from the mistakes. I thought of the unfinished wall, leaning at an angle that made my stomach churn, a visible symbol of risk, of consequences, of choices gone awry. The city inspectors arrived asking questions, pointing to violations I had not expected, and my mind spun with solutions, negotiations, apologies, none of which felt enough. I saw my son lose composure, his frustration spilling over, and I realized he might make a decision that could undo everything. I felt panic rise, cold and sharp, my chest tight, my thoughts racing. I wanted to intervene, to shield him, to save the inheritance. But I could not do everything alone. I felt the full weight of my role as mother and guardian, balancing love, duty, and responsibility in a storm that seemed unending. And then a letter arrived, stamped official, detailing fines and deadlines, each line like a hammer striking. I knew this was more than a warning. It was a deadline, a turning point that demanded action I was not prepared to take. I felt trapped between protecting my son and facing legal consequences, between preserving family trust and confronting harsh truths. I breathed deeply, trying to steady my mind, but even in the quiet moments, fear pulsed like a heartbeat, relentless. I sensed that every move I made now could change everything: my relationships, my finances, my son's future, and the story of our family. And as I stared at the papers, the phone, the leaning wall, I heard the faintest knock at the door, deliberate, certain, and my pulse jumped. Because I knew whatever awaited me beyond that door would decide the next chapter. A chapter that might unravel everything I had tried to hold together, and I hesitated, suspended between action and fear. The suspense almost unbearable. I thought I understood the depth of the problem. Every violation, every misstep, every argument replayed in my mind like a warning. But the truth arrived in a letter, folded neatly, stamped official, that made my hands freeze and my vision blur. I opened it slowly, afraid of what I might find. And the words cut deeper than any fine or legal notice could. My son had not acted alone. Someone we trusted, someone close, had guided him, encouraged the shortcuts, hidden the work from me. And suddenly the anger, fear, and shame became sharper, more personal. I could not believe it at first. Disbelief paralyzing me, my mind raced through faces, voices, conversations, trying to place the betrayal. And then it hit me: my own brother, the one I had considered distant but loyal, had quietly influenced him, pointing out loopholes, promising quick solutions, whispering that no one would ever find out. I felt shock ripple through my chest, betrayal twisting like a knife I did not see coming. The family I thought I knew now seemed fragile, riddled with secrets. I thought of my son, of his ambitions, of the blind trust he placed in the wrong person. I felt disappointment heavier than fear, heavier than anger, because he had believed in someone who had no loyalty to us, and I had believed in him. In all of us, I sat down hard, clutching the papers, trying to breathe, trying to process that the very person who should have protected the inheritance, the family, the legacy, had undermined us. The weight of the revelation pressed on my shoulders. I thought of neighbors, friends, colleagues, everyone whose advice I had considered, and I wondered how many were quietly taking sides. How many were quietly waiting for our fall. I thought of my late husband, how he would have seen the manipulation immediately, and I felt a pang of grief. Wishing he were here to guide me through the storm, I imagined confronting my brother, my heart pounding, my mind spinning, but I realized even that action carried risk. Would he admit it, deny it, turn the blame again? I saw my son, pacing nervously, unaware that the hand guiding him had not been his own. And I felt the urgency spike. Every decision mattered more than ever. Every moment a chance to undo or worsen the damage. I thought about the inheritance, the property, our reputation. and realized the real fight was no longer about permits or walls. It was about trust, about knowing who truly had our best interests at heart. I felt resolve slowly build, determination tempered by caution, but the tension remained, sharp and gnawing, and just as I braced to take action, the phone rang, familiar yet ominous, and I knew the next conversation would either clarify the betrayal or deepen it. I hesitated, heart racing, because in that pause lay the real suspense, the unknown that would shape the fate of my son, the family, and everything we had worked for. And I realized that the twist was not the end of the story. It was the spark that would ignite the battles ahead, the choices I must make under pressure, the truths I must uncover, and even as I felt shock, fear, and anger, I knew one thing with certainty: nothing would ever feel certain again. I could feel the weight of the family pressing down on me. Every eye, every expectation, every whispered word, demanding action. I knew that whatever choice I made now would define the rest of our lives. I had the letter in my hands, proof of betrayal, proof of manipulation, proof that my own brother had steered my son into ruin, and I realized I could expose him, confront him publicly, take legal steps, but doing so risked dividing the family. Risking relationships that could never be repaired. I could shield my son, pay the fines quietly, repair the wall, keep the inheritance intact, but in doing so I would betray the truth, compromise my own moral standing, and allow manipulation to continue unchecked. I paced the rooms, the old wooden floor creaking beneath my weight, my mind racing through every possible outcome, every consequence. I imagined my son grateful but unaware, my brother furious, my family silent with judgment, neighbors whispering and gossiping. I imagined the tension of court, the paperwork, the threats, the explanations, the apologies, and I felt the pressure tighten like a vice around my chest. I thought of the years I spent building trust, teaching lessons, protecting the family, and I knew that this decision was the ultimate test, the defining moment of my life. I thought of my husband, his steady voice guiding me through past storms, and I realized that courage, clarity, and careful thought were the only tools I had. I weighed exposure against concealment, confrontation against quiet resolution, punishment against forgiveness, my chest tight, my hands trembling. I imagined my son standing beside me, unsure, nervous, and I knew that he needed guidance, not judgment. I decided then, slowly, deliberately, that I would confront my brother privately, demand accountability. But I would protect my son from the harshest consequences if he showed genuine responsibility. I would make repairs, pay fines, correct mistakes, but only after ensuring the manipulation could not continue. I would teach lessons without shattering bonds. I would act with firmness and compassion. I felt a mix of fear, relief, and resolve, the decision burning through me like fire tempered by ice. I could not undo the past, I could not erase mistakes, but I could shape the path forward. I breathed slowly, letting the tension ease just enough to act clearly. I called my brother, my voice steady, every word measured, every question probing, every demand unwavering. I could feel his surprise, his denial, his hesitation. I held firm, reminding him of loyalty, responsibility, family, the stakes, the inheritance, the trust. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of control, a sense that action, even difficult action, could restore some balance. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be repairs, negotiations, explanations, and lingering doubt. But the turning point was here. I had chosen a path, a moral and strategic path. I would act decisively, with care, and hope that in the process, the family, the inheritance, and the lessons we all needed to learn could survive. And as I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of exhaustion, determination, and a fragile hope, because for the first time in weeks, I could see the outline of resolution, even if the journey toward it was only just beginning. Sitting in the quiet of my home, the repairs done, the papers filed, the inheritance restored but not without scars, I finally had a moment to breathe, to think, to reflect on everything that had happened. I realized that trust is fragile, that it can be broken in moments of carelessness or manipulation, and that protecting someone you love often means balancing firmness with compassion. I thought of my son, the mistakes he made, the risks he took, and I understood that accountability is as important as forgiveness. I thought of my brother, his betrayal leaving a mark, but also a lesson, that loyalty cannot be assumed, that honesty must be demanded. I thought of myself, the guidance I offered, the patience I showed, and I recognized that even at my age, growth and learning are never finished. That courage sometimes means making decisions that carry both risk and hope. I remembered the fear, the sleepless nights, the panic that gripped me. And I realized that these experiences, painful as they were, taught me resilience, perspective, and the true value of family. I thought of neighbors and friends, some of whom helped others who watched silently, and I learned that not everyone will act as you hope, and that discernment is a skill as vital as love. I realized that wealth, land, and material inheritance are fleeting. But the lessons about character, loyalty, and responsibility are enduring. I thought about the moments I had almost acted in haste, the words I almost spoke, the choices I almost made, and I understood that patience and reflection often prevent regret. I felt relief, but also a quiet sadness, knowing that wounds remain even after resolution, but they serve as reminders of what matters. I considered what I would tell others facing similar dilemmas. That listening, observing, and acting with both strength and empathy can guide through even the most tangled crises. I saw my son learning from the mistakes, taking responsibility, and I felt pride tempered with caution. I thought of the question that haunts me still: what would you have done in my place? Would you have exposed the betrayal immediately, protected the innocence of a loved one, or balanced both with careful deliberation? I realized that there is no simple answer, only the decisions we make and their consequences. I looked around at the house, the repaired walls, the framed photographs, and I felt a sense of closure, not because everything is perfect, but because we faced the truth, acted decisively, and learned the lessons we were meant to learn. I understood that life is a series of choices, some easy, some excruciating, and that reflection, honesty, and courage are the tools that guide us through. I thought of the inheritance, once lost, now secured. But more valuable than money was the wisdom gained, the relationships tested, and the trust rebuilt. I felt peace, subtle and steady, a calm after the storm, and I realized that stories like this, though painful, remind us that family, integrity, and careful guidance are worth every challenge. And as I sit in this quiet, I wonder, would you have made the same choices, or would the weight of responsibility have pushed you another way, leaving only the lessons, and the memories, and the quiet certainty that even in turmoil, we can find resolution, growth, and hope?